My name is Herman Sing. It's a pleasure to join you here at the 4Sight Converge conference. I'll be speaking to you about my new book, and the title of which is Di-volution. So I'm hoping you can all see my screen. And basically, Di-volution is a book that was written to describe a world that is digitally transforming, in fact, pre the pandemic. And obviously, the pandemic has accelerated a lot of that tremendously. Di-volution actually is a combination of two words. It's a combination of digital evolution. And so digital evolution, Di-volution, basically describes the journey that the entire world is on as we begin to hollow out companies and compress value chains with industry collision and radical transformation of products and services. The journey I want to take you on really covers three key components. I'd like to talk about the digital wave meeting the pandemic and what the consequences of that are. Then what I'd like to do is to talk about digital disruption itself and the need for a digital strategy in every business. And finally, I'd like to close out by talking about how one actually builds a digital strategy by giving the audience a few tips and things to consider. The key thing I want to describe first is three words: digitization, and digital transformation. They often get confused. Digitization, if I can use the example of the New Jersey Turnpike here, is what happens when we go from analog to digital. So basically, when you used to go through the New Jersey Turnpike, you used to have to throw coins in. And as you threw those coins in, basically the machine would recognize this and open the boom gate. Now, when we moved from digitization to a tag that you could touch against a pay card, basically that was digitization. We replaced the physical coins with a digital card that you actually had to touch. And so the conversion of analog to digital, whether it's an analog photograph to a digital photograph, an analog movie to a digital movie, that process is called digitization. It's converting artifacts basically into digital versions of themselves, digital twins, if you will. Digitalization is when you take the entire process and convert it. And it's basically what we have in South Africa with e-tolls, where you just drive through and the entire process is basically automated. So the camera looks at your car, takes your number plate, finds your tag, finds your balance, deducts it, and lets you through and opens the boom gate. That automation of that process is referred to as digitalization. Digital transformation is when one implements this across an entire company or across an entire organization. So guess what happened, of course, is we used to think that CEOs and CTOs would drive the digital transformation agenda. In fact, what happened was COVID-19 ended up driving the transformation of most businesses. And why did it do that? Because, well, basically we moved from the experience economy to the isolation economy. And that move from the experience to the isolation economy really favored the adoption of digital technology quite dramatically. So in a sense, the future arrived 9 years roughly earlier than expected. It varies depending on industry. If you look at work from home, if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see that the prediction from a future workforce report generated by Upwork was that by 2028, 73% of all teams will have remote workers. In fact, we got there 8 years early, 9 years early almost. And so this decade of change that we've been through, where we basically had the traditional consumers in the majority, we were going through a transitional phase between 2010 and 2018. And by 2019, we were entering a world where digital natives dominated. In fact, we actually leapfrogged to that space. If you talk to ISPs, they'll tell you they used up between 18 months and 2 years of broadband capacity, fiber capacity within 2 months. If you talk to e-commerce businesses, most of them will tell you they are 3 to 4 years ahead of where they were expecting to be. And the same is true for adoption of digital channels by banks and telecommunication companies. So effectively, we saw an acceleration in the adoption, and COVID became an accelerant. It's like throwing fuel onto a fire. So the future is here. It's just not evenly distributed effectively. So if you look at Shopify traffic, basically today, every day is like Black Friday. Effectively, that's what's happened. And the acceleration in the bankruptcy of retail outlets accelerated. It was always there. It was one of the industries that was heavily hammered, but suddenly we've seen this bankruptcy accelerate. We've seen effectively a doubling of the rate of store closures globally, starting roughly in April of 2020. So it basically accelerated this adoption of digital technology, which seriously affected some businesses more than others. So any business, for example, that involved physical people being in a room together, lots of people in a room together, was heavily hammered. And so we saw the adoption of car commerce, from rock concerts to churches to roadhouses to drive-ins, to drive-in in churches. Basically, we've moved to people being separate from other people. That actually was amazing, but the key point here is, although it affected airlines and cruise ships and hotels and car rental companies more than others, it was clear that prior to this, in fact, other industries had been hit really hard. So why do we need a digital strategy? And the answer to this is really tied to the fact that actually what's happening has been happening for probably 30 to 40 years. We've just suddenly noticed it. And part of the reason we notice it is the digital economy is fundamentally different to the legacy economy that we're very used to. Here's a few examples of this. Firstly, there are dynamic waves of investment. What do I mean by that? Well, basically, if you look at a company like Amazon, Amazon was able to lose money for 20 years. And it was funded by investors on the stock exchange. They just kept raising funds and the share price kept rising. This was a company that was worth more every year. And the reason it was worth more is because its market share kept growing, its revenue kept growing, and it wasn't making any money. Well, that's amazing, because in the physical world, if a company like ShopRite, Checkers, or Pick and Pay started producing 20 years of losses, it would crash, it would be a takeover, and you'd have a new team running that business. In fact, that never happened. It never happened to Amazon, didn't happen to Uber, didn't happen to Facebook. Effectively, investors just kept pouring money in because they knew that this kind of business model was going to win. And so the problem that you've got is you're betting against the force of the entire investment community. So you've got this huge wave of cash backing these companies. And that fundamentally changes the dynamics for any legacy business trying to compete with a company like Amazon. Why was this so? Well, because multi-sided marketplaces work really well. Multi-sided marketplaces like Amazon allow you to have a buy side and a sell side. And when you have marketplaces like this, it makes a lot of sense for every buyer to come, because you've got this amazing assortment of sellers, and for every seller to come, because you've got this amazing assortment of buyers. So multi-sided marketplaces typically get to a critical mass when they get to 60% market share. So when you get to 60% market share, what happens is basically it doesn't make sense for anyone to go anywhere else. You become the go-to destination, which is why Amazon in America is number one. There's no number two. You look at Facebook is number one. There's no number two. There's no number two to Twitter, Pinterest, Instagram. These are all number one players. PayPal, for example, is number one. The number two player is very, very distant to them. So multi-sided marketplace tend to be a winner-take-all business. And therefore there's a huge fast-mover advantage to getting in quickly and scaling. And that is why the money follows you. It follows you because investors understand that the faster you grow, the faster you scale, the more likely you are to overcome any other player that's out there. They don't have access to you. And they know that eventually you're going to win. And you're going to win because of something called network effects. And network effects basically says that the more buyers you get, the more sellers you will attract. And the more sellers you get, the more buyers you will attract. And more importantly, sellers attract sellers. If you think about Facebook, for example, if one member of your family is on Facebook, it makes it more attractive for the rest of your family to be on Facebook. We call this Metcalfe's law. It's basically the way that cell phone networks work. In Metcalfe's law, when the number of users grows by 10%, the amount of revenue or traffic grows by 21%. It's 1.1 squared. So in other words, revenue grows at the square of the increase of the number of users. Now, there's very few other businesses where revenue grows at the square. It means that if your business doubles, your revenue grows 4 times. If your revenue grows 4 times, if your number of customers grows 4 times, your revenue grows 16 times. So that shows you that there's an immense power that's lined up behind these businesses. They are truly exponential. And so I'll talk about broader markets and the blurring of traditional boundaries shortly, but they talk to 2 consequences. One is the compression of value chains, and the other is industry collision. So this digital economy is radically different. And why is it happening? It's happening because technology has basically become free. Bandwidth, if you look at bandwidth costs, storage costs, and computing costs, they've effectively dropped to 0. That's where we are today. And if you look at, therefore, when costs drop to 0, consumption rises to infinity. And so what you see is compute demand is growing at 50%, storage demand is growing at 30%, and network demand is growing at 25%. So basically, we can process everything, store more, and move faster. So basically, the act of running a business involves four things with information: capturing information, sending information, processing information, and storing information. And all four of these things are growing exponentially. Well, this is an amazing wave. This has been happening for 40 years. We've just suddenly noticed it. They say that the future happens very slowly and then it happens very quickly. And two consequences have occurred because of this. The first is we've seen amazing dematerialization of physical products. So if you look at a cell phone and all the physical things that used to be actual devices have now been replaced with software. So as Steve Jobs famously said, software is eating the world. And if you think about, your office application, today you can do everything that you can do in the office, you can do from home. So apps have eaten your office. You've basically appified your life. That wouldn't have been so bad, but what really accelerated this was the speed at which consumers adopted these new innovations. If you look on the right-hand side, you can see that the number of years it took for airlines, for example, to get to 50 million users was 68 years. For the car was 62 years. Whereas Facebook, you can see, was 3 years, and Twitter was 2 years. In fact, Fortnite, the game, I think took something like 3 weeks to get to 50 million users. And Amongst Us, which is the new game, which is all the rage, is actually being adopted even faster. So this is quite scary, right? Because effectively what's driving this is the dramatic increase in the number of people who have access to the internet, and in particular, the number of people who have access to the mobile internet. So what we've done is we've created this incredibly free resource, and simultaneously, we've given everyone access to it and connectivity through it. So the advent of connectivity and appification created basically these new forces that you see on this slide. So these new forces allow for exponential increase in capability, in services, in value. The challenge that you've got, of course, is that your typical company, the victims, can't change fast enough. And so consumers are rallying to these new products, they're adopting them very rapidly, and they're waiting for partners to arrive to deliver new services. And so along comes these killer apps. They come from these exploiters, companies like Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Google, Netflix, Spotify, and they launch these killer apps. And these killer apps basically come in between the victims and these new forces, and consumers adopt them. And so you can see the challenge here. The challenge is latency is causing digital Darwinism. And digital Darwinism is what occurs when companies cannot evolve as fast as consumer behavior does. And so digital Darwinism does not discriminate. Every business is threatened if you're not able to adjust and adapt to these rapidly moving forces. And so if you go back in time to 25 years ago, to the advent of the first Nokia phone with a camera, that was basically the beginning of the end of Kodak. At the same time, we saw Netflix starting to post DVDs. That was the beginning of the end of video rental. And in 1995, Nokia came up with a phone called a Nokia Comes With Music. And Nokia Comes With Music had hundreds of thousands of songs that were preloaded onto your phone. That was basically the beginning. By 2010, we saw the destruction of the TV business because we were starting to adopt streaming more. We saw the downloading of music. We saw print media going into a situation where they're having to put paywalls up. And basically any business that had intermediaries, so any business that had dealers, brokers, agents, distributors. In fact, if your company had that name in it, you were in big trouble. Now, we refer to that as value chain compression. So value chain compression took out all of the intermediaries from these businesses. That started in 2005 is when we began to see that happening. So travel agents started to go bust. Insurance brokers basically couldn't justify the existence between the insurance company and the person who was buying it. You didn't need an intermediary anymore. It was easy to get to the customer, and it was easy to sign up for the service. So value chain compression, not only did it remove intermediaries, it also dramatically lowered the cost. Because today I'm able to use a Kindle, and I'm able to switch on my Kindle. It says, "Hello, Herman. Welcome back. Last time you were here, you bought this. People who bought this also bought this. For your convenience, we've moved the cursor to the button marked buy." And so basically, what you do is if you click that button, 15 seconds later, your book arrives, and 25 seconds later, your phone pings because the payment's gone off. Now, think about this. In less than a minute, you were able to identify the right book to buy, find it, pick it, add it to the shopping basket, right? And pay for it, check out, and have the book physically in your bed ready to read. Now consider what the alternative would have been to have driven into a mall, parked your car, and walked into a shop. You can see why CD companies and book companies worldwide are basically going into bankruptcy, because value chain compression doesn't give you a 5, 10, 15, 20, 90% improvement. It gives you a 99.99% improvement in the efficiency of the value chain. At the same time, we've seen industry collision, because what's now happening is all industries are competing with each other. So it's possible now for a bank, for example, to arrange for delivery of medication. A bank is now delivering medication. A telco can now give you video or music or direct messaging services. And suddenly the question is, who's a publisher, who's a bank, who's a retailer? These boundaries are dissolving and industries are colliding with each other. And it's clear as you go through these 5-year steps that basically by this year, all safe havens are now subject to digital disruption. And the main creature that's caused this is this concept of the two-sided marketplace. So the two-sided marketplace basically brought in two concepts. One concept was the concept of platforms, and the other concept was the concept of ecosystems. So basically a platform takes common services, common functions, common value, and creates a whole bunch of services on them for everybody to use. It then invites buyers and sellers to come onto the platform, and it allows people to work with each other. So if you look at LinkedIn, for example, it allows people who are looking for jobs to find people who are looking to fill jobs. And so this meeting of the minds effectively allows you to get people to rate each other, to find each other quickly, and to get a huge amount of data to manage your business in terms of business intelligence and graphics and analytics, with very smart algorithms helping you, all built and baked into the platform, taking these common tasks that otherwise you would have to do on your own, now get embedded onto the platform, and you basically get a business in a box, a business as a service. This then results in the creation of ecosystems around these platforms, and these ecosystems are made up of companies that enable these functions on the platform, as well as buyers and sellers who are all part of this greater system. Now, the beauty about this is, of course, when you get to a company like Amazon, you're now able, once you've built this platform, to extend the platform into adjacencies. So Amazon started off obviously selling books on its own. Then it basically started selling books for other people. Then it allowed you to publish a book. This book, Di-volution, is published through Amazon, for example. And once you publish it on Amazon, it says, well, I can now give you a Kindle book, I can do a print-on-demand book, I can even give you an Audible book. So suddenly they're competing with 3 different businesses just there. Then they basically launched Twitch, which allows you to do game streaming. Amazon Web Services allows you to do cloud hosting, etc. And what you can see is that basically Amazon is starting to go to war with everyone. If you look at the number of services that Amazon offers today in the financial services space, it's clear that Amazon offers almost as much as a bank. Now, why are these companies growing so fast? They're growing because of unit economics. So basically, the revenue and profits generated in a platform-based business far exceed that of a traditional company. You can see the numbers are sitting at millions of dollars per employee, whereas if you go and look at a bank, for example, it might be tens of thousands of rands. So unit economics play a huge role. Basically, it means a business with very few people can generate a huge amount of revenue, serve a large number of customers, and generate a large profit. This model is not available to analog companies. You can't just suddenly make a small adjustment to your business and get here. So clearly, we all need to develop a digital strategy. The question is, how do we do that? Well, and why are we doing that? Well, on the right-hand side, you can see that we want these benefits of digital transformation: customer experience, agility, data-based insights. We want to inculcate digital culture and get more collaboration. The problem is, on the left-hand side, you can see that 78% of enterprises fail to implement the digital transformation initiatives as envisioned. And there are many reasons for this. They range from technology to communications to culture. So clearly, there's a lot of problems that companies are having, even though they are searching for these solutions. The fact of the matter is that digital evolution, Di-volution is inexorable. If you look at banking and financial services, insurance, healthcare payers, as well as retail, you can see that the level to which we are beginning to implement this is accelerating. Different parts of banking, for example, shows you currently in the dark blue, that we've got a large number of implementations already running. We've got a number of implementations that are in pilot, and a number of them are already being considered. And this occurs in middle office, back office, and front office. And so you're starting to see this application of technology throughout the business. So the question then becomes, how do we do this? Well, here's a simple model that was adopted by Domino's Pizza. And basically the model that is recommended is to look at 4 elements of your business. The first element of your business that needs to be digitally transformed is how you engage with your customers. We call that channels. So channels need to be engaged, and wherever you've got in physical engagements, these need to be replaced with electronic engagements. Often what we are talking about is, for example, getting rid of call centers. Facebook, Amazon, and Apple, for example, don't run very large call centers. I bought something from Apple. It was impossible to talk to someone in the Kindle business to try to get my Kindle replaced. They basically try really hard to make sure they don't talk to people. So they force you to use digital channels to self-manage your service. The second thing that you can do is to optimize your back office. And here what you really need to do is to create this back office factory, outsource, and basically bring in a lot of partners who can give you applications as a service, software as a service, infrastructure as a service. And as you do that, you start to find that you need fewer and fewer people to run your business. The third thing you can do is to transform your product. And what that really means is, to what extent can I take a product that is very analog in nature, like insuring a car, and convert it to a digital product where I only charge you for distance traveled, for example. Amazon, for example, on my book, has implemented a system where if you get Kindle Unlimited, meaning you get a pretty much unlimited ability to read any book you want, the author only gets paid per page that you read, which is actually quite powerful, because what Amazon has done is Amazon basically limited its costs. It says you can have any book you want, but I'm only going to pay the author if you actually read the book. In the same way, Spotify does the same thing with music, and Netflix does the same thing with movies. They only pay the studio when the music or the movie is actually consumed. Well, the same thing is now happening in books. That's a beautiful example of transforming your product. Finally, you want to empower your employees. And what that really talks to is the extent to which routine tasks that Microsoft, for example, has built into its Microsoft Office, you could do the same thing with your offices. Take all of your tasks that you have that are routine tasks and basically appify them. How do we do this? We do this by being ambidextrous. We have to look at 2 speeds of change. Clearly, the core of the business can't change quickly. So what you need to do is to create disruptive growth outside of the core. So you need rapid growth outside the core with slower growth inside the core. And that allows you to do 2 things. One, it gets the core to the future eventually, but in the meantime, it allows you to fake it until you make it. So in closing, folks, some of the key takeouts are really that this is an inevitable journey, a journey we all have to embark on, and a journey that we all need to win. So the first key message, I guess, is that to do something new, you must stop doing something old. And that does require a fundamental change in the way that we think, in the way that we work, and the fact that there's got to be a willingness to cannibalize ourselves and basically fundamentally change the artifacts and processes we have in the business today. The second thing that we have to do is to recognize that a lot of what we do will fail. And if it does fail, that's not a reason to stop innovating. It's basically a reason for you to start pivoting. So the word pivoting really has become a word that's maybe a bit overused, but it's critical. It means try new things. If they fail, move on, try something else. And that's fundamentally how a lot of digital transformation is happening. And then I guess the key final slide is really that we all trying to forecast the future, and it's really difficult. And so rather than forecasting the future, what you want to do is adapt to the future as it arrives. How do we do that? Well, there's 2 things you've got to do. As Satya Nadella said, the CEO of Microsoft, longevity is about being able to reinvent yourself or invent the future. You basically have 2 choices. You either change your business to become more and more efficient until you become unbeatable, or if you can't win in the business that you're in today, then what you needed to do is to invent a new business that you can go into, which is what Microsoft has done in many spaces, such as Azure, for example. So in summary, COVID is an accelerant. It really has accelerated us to the future. It's getting us there faster. So your obligation is to design your future. You've got to sit back, look at your future, and conceive what it could look like. Agility is very key to this because of the uncertainty, meaning it's difficult to actually predict what's actually going to happen. And in the absence of certainty, agility and flexibility are far more important capabilities. To do this, we've got to think about customers. We've got to think about what jobs they're trying to do, what pains they have, what gains we could give them, and how we can do this in an omni-channel and contextual way. Data is clearly becoming the new oil, and so analytics becomes critical, and our ability to look backwards and look forwards to get insight becomes critical to winning. To win, we need to co-create with partners, and we need to start building platforms. Because clearly platforms will give us the economics that we need in order to succeed. So folks, there's a lot of more material available on my podcast. I hope you enjoy my book, and there's my website. If you'd like to go to that, you're more than welcome to access a lot of the material that's there. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that presentation, and I look forward to engaging with you further, maybe taking some of your questions, and potentially communicating outside of this conference. Thank you very much.